believe in the process. And right now they are unconvinced. And this bill somehow is supposed to make things better. But this bill is not very convincing either. This is a downright bad bill. There's some, line in the budget that says this bill will cost us $150 million. I don't believe that, and you shouldn't either. We have no fiscal note. We have no numbers. Of course, this morning, there were about 8 to 10 unredacted vendor proposals that the Secretary of State has had since August 2018 released. Why they weren't released earlier is a mystery to me. Why there's no fiscal note is a mystery to me, but it is very curious in a troubling way. But of course, there's no time as of 9 a.m. this morning to analyze hundreds of pages of reports. Because there was no time for that, and we have no fiscal note, the best independent analysis we have is one that was released last week by the OSET Foundation, which stands for Open Source Election Technology Institute, and it was conducted by a veteran industry insider. And it puts the cost of the machines that we are mandating the state to buy at $90,000 more than hand-marked paper ballots. Even more troubling, in addition to the failure to release the proposals and numbers, the Secretary of State's office has actually peddled false numbers. The FreedomWorks letter that you have on your desks that decried this and said, the Secretary's analysis is like comparing the cost of buying a Chevrolet plus insurance, gas, and repairs for 10 years to the cost of buying a Bentley and then trying to insist that the Bentley is cheaper. And the letter continues, the Secretary of State would so gravely mislead the legislature on the costs of HB 316 is deeply troubling. And it calls this bill, these machines, a boondoggle for the vendors and an enormous waste of taxpayer dollars. Folks, this would be the biggest contract ever in the industry. It is 1/2 the annual industry business total of $300 million annually, 1/2 of it. Is there any surprise that the vendors are salivating over the notion of getting this contract? Is there any wonder that voters across the state and across the country are raising their eyebrows about what exactly is going on here? There's also the unfunded mandate, up to $7 million a year. I've heard about almost $6 million. I've heard $1 per voter per year. We have no idea if that will fall to the counties or whether we will come up with it as a state legislature. The machines are not secure. The consensus of cybersecurity experts and computer scientists and our nation's premier National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine state that the best voting technology that's available is hand-marked paper ballots with a human-readable ballot marking device available for disabled voters. The National Academy of Sciences said, that unless a voter takes notes while voting, BMDs that print only selections with abbreviated names and descriptions of the contests are virtually unusable for verifying voter intent. The same study goes on to note that the difficulty and unlikelihood of voters verifying any BMD-produced ballot has prompted calls for hand-marked ballots whenever possible. So they're cheaper and safer, and that's why 70% of the country is using them. Where these are used, they're typically only for the disabled voters, and of course, that is appropriate. They are unauditable. We had a little bit of a discussion earlier about auditing, and there are two big problems that I want to point out. The reason folks say they are unauditable and studies indicate that they are unauditable is because there's been an interface between the voter intent and the actual ballot that serves as the vote of record. So when you hand mark a paper ballot, your intent is captured right on the vote of record. When you interface with the machine then has to record the voter intent. Unless the entire ballot is printed out and voters take notes it is impossible to accurately verify the ballot. We all know that there are dozens of, unopposed judicial races. There are constitutional amendments. Folks, we are kidding ourselves if we think that people can remember the entire ballot. We can't even do that. What a joke. Which means it is easy to have races added or subtracted through malware. It's just not hard to do. So therefore, and even if that weren't a problem, that voters did have photographic memory and they would be able to accurately recall the ballot when they're, the entire ballot that they just voted on the machine when they're staring at the piece of paper, over half of voters aren't going to take the time to do it. And that is a problem because you know what? It's not their job. The voter's job is to vote. The voter's job is not to have to worry about the accuracy of the machine. And we, on this, put the onus on the voter to worry about the accuracy of the machine. And there's no reason for it. If there were a reason for it, maybe that would be acceptable, but there's just no reason to do it that way. It's already been mentioned how an additional flaw just came out, I believe Friday or Saturday, regarding these machines that we're mandating the state to buy. There's an all-in-one function whereby even after the quote-unquote verification, the voter feeds the ballot back into the machine. Races can be added, lines can be added to a barcode, which invalidates the entire ballot, and it would be unreadable, and the voter would have absolutely no idea. Barcodes are another problem because if those are what's actually scanned, and the voters will feel betrayed by that, then what they're even attempting to verify, they will understand that they can't verify it because they can't read it anyway. So I could go on and on, but there's like 8 problems with this so-called, ability to audit. The audit language itself in this bill is extremely weak. It doesn't require any risk-limiting audits except for the pilot program, which is in 1 county. It doesn't require them after that. So all this talk about audits, not only can you not even do them with these machines, the bill doesn't even say we're gonna have them anyway. What a joke. The pre-certification audit isn't even a risk-limiting audit in this bill. It's a tabulation audit, and there is a difference. Shame on any of you who have not bothered to ask that question. When you dig into this legislation and you see all of the open questions, you just start scratching your head. Why on earth would we buy less secure machines that are opposed by the voters, opposed by national security experts, at risk of being decertified right now in New York, are far more expensive than the hand-marked paper ballots, are possibly going to be decertified by the national election authorities within 2 to 4 years when we're taking out a 20-year bond, and you start saying, why on earth would we buy these things? I have been baffled, absolutely baffled. This is not a partisan issue. You don't do voting machines on a party line vote. This is crazy. And so I'm like, what is going on here? I've been given absolutely no good reason why we should buy these things. There's not one good reason. So therefore, it just reeks of corruption that we're prioritizing vendors over voters. I want you folks to know that one of the individuals in the governor's office is still registered as a lobbyist for the top vendor that this bill appears to have been written for. His lobbyist credentials haven't even been terminated from that vendor. Come on, this is a joke. All voters oppose this, right wing, left wing. The only people that don't are the ones that want the contract to be as big as humanly possible. Well, I hope that we've exposed what is going on here. I think this bill is quite a debacle. I think that anyone that votes for it will have been derelict in their duty to the voters and taxpayers of Georgia. And I think it's going to be a big problem from our state for years to come. And there is no reason to vote for it. And I'm shocked that it has gotten that far. And no one should vote for it without getting all these questions answered. We need the numbers from this morning analyzed. We need a fiscal note. We need to know what's going on with the New York machines. It is inexplicable why no one cares what the answers to those questions are. Just inexplicable. And therefore you have the whiff of corruption. And it stains this body. that we're passing it. Mr. President, I appreciate it, and I'm willing to answer questions if there are any.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 27th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, would you yield for a series of questions from your favorite freshman senator?
Yes, I would, Senator, of course.
Thank you. Senator, you, I assume, believe in voter privacy, correct?
I do, and that's another problem with this bill.
Why would you support a system that inherently segregates able-bodied voters from disabled voters?
So, Senator, the largest risk of this system is that a computer hacking or malfunction could destroy the legitimacy of the election through the machines. There is, of course, a need for us to take care of disabled voters, and that's why most states do hand-marked paper ballots, and then they do have a machine more like this for the disabled. But it still makes all the sense in the world to have the most secure, best, and least expensive system for the vast majority of voters.
But isn't it true, Senator, that if you segregate the voting process, that if a precinct were to have 1 or 2 or 3 disabled voters who had to vote on the machine that you're in favor of them voting on, and everybody else voted on a paper ballot, doesn't that eliminate their privacy when people can see how they voted in a recount process versus how the other folks voted in a recount process?
It's actually fascinating that you asked that question. I wasn't even going to go into it, but there's yet another problem with at least 2 of these vendors, which is that all of the scanners encrypt a timestamp. So if anyone in a small county, in particular, it's the biggest risk, but any poll worker, whoever that has access to the inside of the machine has written down the order that people voted, no one's vote is secret on these things because of the timestamp, and I've seen the user manuals referring to the timestamp. And that's another question that we have, because if that is the case, and those documents are accurate, which I believe they are, then none of our votes are secret on these machines, and that violates not only the bill, but also the Georgia Constitution.
Thank you, Senator. I'll just restate my question, if you don't mind. Isn't it true that with your bifurcated proposal of different types of machines for different people, doesn't that inherently remove privacy for those who, because they have Alzheimer's or because they may be not able to mark the paper ballot, doesn't that remove their privacy?
Senator, my answer is these machines have the high risk of removing the privacy for every single voter, disabled or not. Now, to answer your question, we do, of course, need to make sure that there's a way for the disabled to vote. But under your scenario, we're all in worse shape.
If you don't mind, I'll continue with my series of questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Isn't it true what you're talking about timestamping also true of our current voting machines?
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay.
But there are a lot of problems with our current machines.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Isn't it true that every member of your party who is still in this body voted for the current machines?
I have no idea. That was like 20 years ago.
It was, but if I may, the senator knows of what he speaks. I have another question about your unfunded. You made a mention of unfunded mandates, and isn't it true that if we go to paper ballots, you mentioned OSET earlier today, that their estimation was $95 million. The Secretary of State's estimation was $163 million. Isn't it true under whichever number you believe, if you meet halfway in the middle, call it over $100 million, isn't it true that that also is an unfunded mandate to the localities?
The thing is, the Secretary of State's numbers, as I already mentioned from the Freedom Works letter, have been called out as being as like peddling false numbers, so I don't really want to talk about theirs at all. Can you repeat your question without referencing
Sure,
them?
let's reference OSET's numbers, which are $97,240,000.
That's not the numbers I have, Senator.
They had 2 sets of numbers. They had a low number and a high number. That's their high number. And I actually have a little bit of insight into this because my father's a ballot salesman in Illinois and has been selling paper ballots for a number of years. And so I ran some of the numbers by him, and he actually said that based on the pricing they do throughout Illinois, that the Secretary of State's numbers were pretty accurate. With one exception, he said probably 110% of the voting population needed to be printed versus 120. So I've actually, in my own analysis, discounted that.
A little high then.
But whether it's 90 million or you take their lower number, which I think was in the 60s, or you take 80 million, isn't that an unfunded mandate?
So the numbers I'm looking at are you talking about the differential between the hand-marked paper ballots with moderate ballot printing and or high ballot printing.
That's right.
and
I'm talking about the 10-year,
the differential,
on a 10-year life cycle of these machines.
So the 90 million that you would get to between the moderate ballot and the BMD.
Just the ballot printing, just printing paper ballots. Forget the BMDs for a second.
So I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
My question is, isn't ballot printing, which is expensive, between 40 cents and 65 cents
okay.
per voter, and as you know, we would need to print ballots for every voter, even though we know every voter won't show up. Isn't that an unfunded mandate?
Senator, you're preaching to the choir on that. I do think we need all these questions answered before we vote for this bill.
Do you think that the reason, since that is an unfunded mandate, do you think that's the reason why ACCG has supported this notion, is to avoid the unfunded mandate, let the state bear the bulk of the burden of the cost while not passing on the burden of that cost to the localities, the counties, which is what would happen if we did have paper ballots?
I don't want to speak for ACCG. I believe that their stance on this, which was developed a while ago, arose not from anything related to what you were just mentioning, but instead from the election supervisors.
Thank you. And you mentioned earlier in your question, and you mentioned it again today, that this would probably be the largest contract, and that very well may be true. How many states, Senator, require a uniform voting process throughout all the counties in their states?
The only ones I know of for sure are us and Delaware.
I think that Oklahoma does as well, but it's
Okay.
less than 5 states. So, Senator, isn't it true that by virtue of anything that we do, since we're mandating that it's uniform, and since we are using a single point of purchase fee via the state, isn't it true that no matter what we do, we're going to be at the top tier of the expenditure because we will be the largest body making the largest purchase in a mandated situation, whereas 45 other states don't have a statewide mandate?
Well, two responses to that, Senator. The first is that it gets back to the exchange I was having with the senator from the 3rd, whereby it is not recommended that a state have an all-in-one system at every single precinct across the state because it doesn't leave you any room for error. So that's the first thing I would say, is we shouldn't even be doing it this way. We should be able to have different systems so that we can have feedback and data to make sure we're utilizing the ones that work best. And then my second answer would be yes, of course our contract is going to be large, but as the OSET report that we were just discussing points out, it is far larger using BMDs than using paper ballots.
I'll certainly give you that, Senator. You mentioned the different machines. Can you help me understand more of what you would mean by different machines in different localities?
It is my understanding that because, as you so agreed, very few states do it this way, where everyone uses a uniform system, every voter in the state. It's done at the county level, and they recommend against everyone purchasing the same machines. It's done at the county level or at the city level. So that allows for different systems to be utilized.
But are you referencing different types of ballot marking devices? Are you referencing different types of optical scanners for paper ballots? What would you advocate for in that deployment?
Well, what I'm advocating for currently, based on all available information, having received none that contradicts it in any real fashion, what I'm advocating for is the hand-marked paper ballots with optical scanners. I'm not privy to any other conversations occurring across the country other than ours here, other than it is my understanding that 70% of people are voting on hand-marked paper ballots. So that result would speak for itself to a certain extent.
Okay. You mentioned malware earlier as well, and you're a student of the law. I've owned a software development company for 14 years, so I'm a student of computers. Isn't it true, Senator, that any computer can be hacked?
It is, Senator.
And isn't it true, Senator, that the optical scanners that will require the counting of the vote, will require human programming?
Yes.
And isn't it true, Senator, therefore, that since they will require human programming, the optical scanners are also subject to malware attacks?
Those also, as I was saying with the senator from the 3rd, it's not that there's no risk, but as the National Academy of Sciences said in its recent report, while paper ballots also can be tampered with, the risk cannot be compared. An electronic system is vulnerable to a system-wide failure or cyber attack, while hand-marked paper ballots would have to be tampered with one by one. The same report asserted that ballot summaries are impossible for voters to verify and says, malware, suspicious software that includes worms, spyware, viruses, Trojan horses, and ransomware, is perhaps the greatest threat to electronic voting.
Thank you, Senator. This will be my last question, and maybe what the folks left out of that statement. Isn't it true that unless you have human counting, which I don't hear anybody advocating for, that under either system, the last stop in the voting process, whether it's a ballot marking device that prints the selection or it's a hand-marked paper ballot, the last step in the process is a computer that can be hacked? Isn't that true, Senator?
That may be true, Senator, but what you're saying essentially is these machines both have that problem. And what I'm saying is it is true that you don't eliminate all risk, but how can you make the argument that these are equal or better when we also have 8 other fantastic reasons that these are bad? Cost, they might be decertified, they are less secure because there's a computer interface at both sections. Cybersecurity experts are against them, voters are against them, the right and the left are against them. Then there are 14 other reasons for why these are bad. So I just don't get it. Maybe you can explain to me when I come back to my seat.
I'd be happy to do that, and I would like to thank you for indulging your favorite freshman senator.
I'm just so glad you've joined us.
Do you continue to yield, Senator?
Yes, Mr. President.
I brought 3 protein bars with me today. That gets me 9 hours.
We can bring you some peanut M&Ms if you...
Chair recognizes the senator from the 56th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
Of course. To my friend from North Fulton.
Senator, thank you. I appreciate your passion. Something you brought up that was concern, if you'll yield for a question, is you mentioned that anybody who would vote against this bill today would be derelict. Is that not true?
You mean for it?
For the bill, that's right. So, in 2002, the General Assembly passed the current voting machines we have today. Is that not true?
I do not know.
Let's just say that
We'll
I'm
stipulate.
right. Okay. So, Senator, in 2002, your colleagues, the senators from the 34th, the 36th, the 2nd, the 40th, the 26th, the 15th, and the 35th, all voted for the current voting machines we have today that you have all went on and said there was a grave concern with non-auditability. So, Senator, were they derelict when they made their vote in 2002?
Well, Senator, see, what's interesting is at the time, we weren't aware of all the concerns that have come to light now. None of those senators think that this system is a good idea, and this system is essentially the same system. It's really not any better. And I know none of them are planning to vote for it today.
Will the senator yield?
Of course.
Senator, isn't it true that in 2002, the debate was very similar, and it talked about auditability? And isn't it true that right now, the machines that are being offered actually have an auditability of putting the ballots in there and having a hand count copy? So the debate was similar. So isn't it true that if you are consistent with your message, then your colleagues that I just read off must have been derelict in 2002?
I'll repeat my reference to the fact that we have far different concerns today than we did 20 years ago. Also, I'm not sure why we're talking about 20 years ago, but also I do want to mention you may have missed my lengthy and astute explanation about why these machines are not actually considered audible at all. So I won't repeat it, but let me just throw that out there again, that these are not actually auditable.
Okay, last but not least, Senator, when we're finally done with this debate and you go back to your desk, are you going to do a hand-marked ballot and carry it to the Secretary of Senate, or will you press your voting button and see it on the board?
But Senator, I'll be able to see how it comes up. Unfortunately, we can't do that with these machines.
The gallery will refrain.
I'm happy to yield for more questions if there are any, but I'm certainly happy to take my seat too, Mr.
Chair
President.
recognizes the senator from the 17th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator yield for a series of questions.
Of course.
Unlike our current system now, House Bill 316 actually calls for paper ballots, correct?
Yes, there would be a ballot on thermal paper.
Okay, and the bill also requires those ballots be human readable, correct?
I think it does. It does not eliminate the barcode, which itself is a problem, as we've discussed, but it does, I believe, say human readable.
The bill also says that the printout will say who the person voted for, which office they're running for, which political party they're a member of, correct?
I believe so.
And then
In a summary format.
Summary.
Correct?
And then
yeah.
The bill also says that once that printout is given to a voter, there'll be a sample ballot by the scanner where they can double verify their vote. Is that not correct?
That is not correct.
That's
That was
not in the bill.
that was offered by the minority party and rejected.
That amendment was actually
No.
accepted in the bill.
No.
And so,
I can go right to that. We thought it was, or I thought it was. Unfortunately, that was rejected.
we'll get some clarity on that.
All right.
And isn't it true that there's no part of this bill that keeps someone from still voting with the hand marked ballot if they want to?
That I'm not sure about. I do know that under current law, counties do have the ability to utilize a hand-marked paper ballot system, but this would actually take away that ability. And I don't know the answer to your other question.
Can't any citizen still get an absentee ballot and vote by
Oh,
hand?
certainly, yes.
And this bill does not keep that from happening,
As
correct?
far as I know, no, it does not.
And Senator, when we vote in this body, we push a button, correct?
Yes,
And after I push that button, I see my vote on the screen, right? Is that correct?
yes, yes,
And I can also go get a printout of that screen, correct?
you can.
Are you advocating this body go to hand-marked paper voting as well?
Well, Senator, as we just went over, I can see immediately if my vote was correct or not. I can also get the printout, which I could take with me, which would demonstrate whether the vote was correct or not if I was concerned. None of that is true of these machines.
That's correct, because with these machines, you automatically will see how you voted and will get a printout, correct?
You don't keep the printout,
That's right, because it's saved for the audit, correct?
but the audit is meaningless.
But the audit will actually be counted by hand. With
The
human
audit,
readable
Senator,
ballots, correct?
first of all, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, this audit language is very weak. It calls for, the only widespread audit is a tabulation audit, which is not the same as a risk limiting audit. Then there is a pilot program in one county on some kind of audit, but it doesn't specify anything past that. So no, I would agree that even if these machines were audited, the language in the bill is regarding audits is not something any of us should feel confident in.
My last question, do you believe that the Senate should go to hand-marked ballot voting in this body?
If I had no idea how I voted and wasn't allowed to have a record of it, then my answer would be yes.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 40th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
Yes, I will.
I want to go back to the issue of hacking. Isn't it true that the voting servers at KSU were hacked?
That is true.
And isn't it true that there's no way to know if the DRE machines have been hacked?
That's exactly right.
And isn't it true that there was an anomaly in the 2018 lieutenant governor's race in which undervotes were recorded on the DREs, but not the absentee ballots, which are hand-marked paper ballots?
That is true.
And that the chances of this happening by chance are near zero?
That's exactly right. And you raise another really important point, that we don't have any idea if these machines were ever hacked because there is no paper trail, and we also can't look at the source code. The same problem exists with these machines. It's a private for-profit industry, a point I believe that the senator from the 40th astutely made, which means that we are dedicating our public trust for our most sacred and foundational right to companies that will not let us test their machines for vulnerabilities. I see my time has expired, Mr. President. Thank you, and I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 34th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the chamber. On yesterday, we had a recess day, right? And several of us had subcommittee hearings for the appropriations. So I happened to have been down here when I learned from my staff that there were machines for voting in 405. And I decided I needed to go and see what those machines are, but I had been told we were looking at 7 machines. When I got in the room, there were 2. With the 2 that was there, I kind of said to my good friend, the majority leader, why didn't I know about these machines? And I think the response was something like, I keep up with 30-something, and your other leader should have told you. But I asked my minority leader why didn't he tell me? And he said he was not aware. And that was troubling to me. I met a nice gentleman named Bill Murphy. He was with Clear Ballot. He actually stated he did not have his machine to literally demonstrate, only that it was on a projection where on the computer you could see how it should respond and what it should do, because he had only got the invitation the day before. I found that troubling. And then I moved over to the other machine, and Jeb Cameron, he gave me his card talking about his machine, and that's ESS and S. He didn't actually have a business card because he was given a notice at the last minute as well. So here on the back, he wrote me his phone number and his email address. We are doing something so hurriedly. I really was disappointed, mainly because I work a lot with seniors. And the seniors in my district who are voters would just like to see the machines we're talking about spending all the taxpayer monies on. I would have told them, had I been given ample time, this was occurring here under the Gold Dome, but we was on a recess day anyway. But we didn't have a chance to even invite people down here to actually see for themselves at least 2 of the 7 that I'm aware of choices that we are considering. I don't have enough answers to be comfortable, even though I did hear my seat number called out earlier, and yes, I was here in 2002, and just like my grandkids that I love to talk about keep growing, every day things change. We're getting a little bit better, and from 2002 to where we are today, things have changed, but 2002 was better than what we had. So we thought we were moving in the right direction, but as we continue to move and innovation continue to happen, we're going to continue to be moving forward. Hopefully, even though we're talking a lot of money with no fiscal note, we don't know if that's the best thing yet, but we do know as the world keeps turning, things will change, and hopefully these younger minds will bring new ideas, new innovations to get us closer to that perfection that we're looking for. Mr. President, I'll yield the well if there are no questions.
You have no questions. The chair would like to recognize the senator from the 39th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to highlight the significance of our review of any bills that relate to our election system or the right to vote. I believe that free and fair elections are the essence of our democracy. Every eligible citizen should have the opportunity to cast their ballot in an election and trust that that ballot will be counted. As Congressman Lewis would say, the vote is precious, almost sacred. And knowing that people actually paid the ultimate sacrifice for people like me to be able to go to the ballot box and cast my vote gives me a responsibility to ensure that these rights are not rolled back in any way. The most recent gubernatorial election is one that I'll never forget. I witnessed firsthand as Georgians waited in line for hours to vote. The large numbers of individuals kicked off the voter rolls and stalled voter registration applications. We have a responsibility to our citizens to make sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that each and every eligible vote that is cast is counted. We even had a group of citizens gathered at the state capitol last November demanding that our state count every vote. These citizens were willing to put their freedom on the line to make sure that their votes were counted. But what needs to be highlighted in each of these individual stories is their frustration as they took time out of their busy days to take part in a democratic process, yet their voices still felt suppressed. Standing in line for hours and missing a day of work is not something that all households around our great state can afford. But from stories of individual after individual, I heard the passion, drive, and desire for wanting to have a voice in the person that will represent the needs of their families. So as I look at HB 316, I think about each and every citizen in our great state that is eligible to vote. I think about what it takes for them to get to the polls. And I know that with this bill, we will not know what happens to their vote once it is cast on an insecure voting machine. I want to be able to look the citizens of Georgia, and especially those that I have been standing with, demanding that their votes are counted. And I want to tell them that yes, their vote will be counted. But unfortunately, the way that HB 316 is written and the voting machines that we're moving towards, I can't assure them that, and that's why I can't not vote for this bill. Thank you. I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 35th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm allergic to flowers, and everybody's yellow flowers. This is artificial, but everybody else is taking my voice away. But I stand and I rise against House Bill 316. You know, my grandmother used to say the more things change, the more they remain the same. When we have been talking about these voting machines, even the last time when in 2002 when it came up, and incidentally that was not my vote. I had left and Kasim Reed was here in the 35th Senate District. I would have voted against it because it was just as many problems then as it is now. New voting machines have been available for us to see ever since last March. I remember how it was told when the session was going on that we could go over to the CLOB and see them new machines. So I actually went over to see them. And since then, it's been at least 5 other times that they've had them on display. I had a chance to see not all of them at one time, but all of them that are being mentioned now. And the first thing I thought is that it's similarly vulnerable machines to the ones that we already have. And then they're gonna actually cost from $100 million to $150 million. And it's an unfunded mandate. And most of the smaller counties cannot afford these machines that we have currently. Some of them didn't even get the money to get the ones that we're currently using since 2002. So where's the money coming from? And and why, when the machines have the same problems? It's all about the money, is what they always say. Follow the almighty dollar. And that's what we need to do, because the real problems are really not being addressed, like absentee ballot process. It's not secure. I put a bill in and it wasn't heard at all. And it was very simple. Right now, you receive your absentee ballot, and you have to put your personal information not only on the inside, but on the outside of that envelope. Unless you're overseas or in the military, then they had a different absentee ballot, and you put the information on the inside. So that's all my bill was requesting, but we did not address that. They did not even give me a hearing or anything on a simple bill that would have corrected a lot of problems, because many of the absentee ballots that were not counted in this last election was because many people didn't want to put their personal information on the outside of the envelope. So their vote was not even counted, and they realized that. They went through the process of applying for absentee ballot. It went through the process of being approved, and the ballot was sent to them. They filled it out, and because they didn't put their personal information that was they had already put on the inside, on the outside of the envelope, then it was not counted. That's something we need to look at the real problems and secure that. And then, for example, my mother, who moved in from Collier Heights all the way to Cascade Road back in 1976, she moved in that house. She's been voting at the same precinct since my sister that just turned 40-something was born. And she lives there with my mother. She never changed her address. But they went to vote the last time, not in the primary, but in the general, and they say, you don't vote here anymore. What is happening there? They had to go through all of this. My mother went, they said, oh, we changed your voting place. You've never voted here. You don't have this. We need this information and that. My mother does not miss a vote. I've been running for 20-something years, and you know my mother had to vote for her daughter. She had to vote in the election whether I was on her ballot or not. So she definitely voted. And then this time, she went through so much. She went to 2 different places and finally voted on a provisional ballot. And do they really count those provisional ballots? I think not in most places. So why are we not addressing that in these bills that we're talking about? What about the integrity of the voting places where early voting is that's not a government place? What about that? I've heard so many complaints and people who really have a chance to do something wrong. And auditing, that's another issue that we need to look at even closer than 1 or 2 lines that they're putting on it. So I stand to vote against this because we need to address the real problems and not create another unfunded mandate. And I remember it was when I was in high school, maybe elementary school, when high school, I believe. Maynard Jackson, who was a brilliant man, stood and talked to our class and said the most important thing that most people think are the books, but that only comes with the books and the ballot. Check the ballot. So it's the 3 B's, the books, the ballots, and then the bucks. But then later, I heard him talk years later, and he said, oh no, follow the money. It's the money, it's the bucks. So that's what we need to do. We need to see who's gonna get money off of this. I mean, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but this is a bad bill. This is going to fund somebody's pocket when it's not even necessary, in my opinion. We need to find a solution to our problems, and this, in my opinion, is not it. I will not take any questions. I know it's not even any. We've just been talking about the same thing over and over again. I just wanted to recap what the real problems are. So, Mr. President, I yield the well. Thank you.
Senator has yielded the well. Current posture is we're closing in on closing debate, and the time is 1:30. We're going to continue to push forward and get to a vote. But we've only got a handful of folks left, and my encouragement is to be as brief as possible so that we can honor the committee meetings that we've got after this. The chair would like to recognize the senator from the 36th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise in opposition to this bill. I think some very potent arguments and information have been shared from this well by members of my party. I don't feel compelled to go on at length, but I do, this decrying of a paper ballot and how that's something that's out of another age and we're past that and we should move on. Don't we still test all our students with the ACT and the SAT with the bubble in, with a pen or pencil? We do, and we rely on those results, and that's commonplace, and nobody casts aspersions at it or throws any shade on that. And when you learn that 70% of the votes cast in this country are paper ballots, that gives one pause. Votes are being cast every day, all across, every election season, all across the country. In Virginia, it's an off year. They'll be voting this November with a hand-marked paper ballot. And yet we want to stick with the story that that is a fatally flawed system, and that we've got to move to a purchase of some unknown amount of dollars for the largest purchase of machines, voting machines that's ever been made in the nation. What are we thinking? Where did fiscal conservatism go to? Finally, the question of vendor issues, and I think it's been put very well by one of our colleagues. Are we choosing vendors over voters? I think there's some pretty compelling set of facts that would cause any reasonable person to raise an eyebrow. And we had some extensive debate the other day about how terrible Atlanta runs its airport, and we've got to look into this corruption, and we've got to look into this conflict of interest, and we've got to go in there and do a state takeover. Aren't you concerned that someone who's still listed as a lobbyist for the largest election machine company in the country is working in the governor's office? I mean, that's such a conflict of interest on its very face. Wouldn't you want to erase any doubt in voters' minds that this is a rigged bid? But when you see, if you go back and you look at the very lackadaisical attitude, frankly, during the commission hearings, the fair commission hearings, and you see that people were just almost jocular about what's this going to cost? Oh, $150 million. Oh, all right, $150 million. The lack of any serious delving into the numbers and subjecting those numbers to strict scrutiny, that was simply not done. That was simply not done, and that's in front of the entire world. Anybody that cared to go to those hearings, and I have many constituents who did, would see that in a flash, that there was no due diligence being done on the numbers and on the cost. And then when the fact comes out that our local election officials and our local taxpayers are going to, in all likelihood, wind up with this cost pushed down to the local election boards with no notice, I think from this moment going forward, every time a fiscal note is required in one of our committees, you're going to hear about it. I've seen bills turned back because of no fiscal note that are very minor in their impact. And we put those laws on the books, and we put those rules in the Senate rule book for a reason, so that you'd have some way to have your arms around what's going to be the fiscal impact on the taxpayers, on the state dollars, on the local dollars. How can you all vote for this without knowing that? I mean, to have that ruling and to support that ruling that we don't need a fiscal note or an expenditure of this nature, we've seen 10 and 15-page fiscal notes, rightfully so, on complex matters that have come before us, and we're shrugging that off. That creates that sends such a message to the voters and to the taxpayers. I must say that when you have the right and the left, when you have Freedom Works, when you have cybersecurity experts right and left, and I don't mean to say that they are partisan, but I mean wherever you looked, you find a cybersecurity expert, and they will tell you this is not a secure voting system. But we throw all of that away. And this machine vote is not truly auditable because they'll be counting something that the machine produced, not counting the original ballot that you marked by hand. That's when you've got a true audit trail. it's a shame to see this rush through, and I believe truly that we will live with this mistake for generations yet to come. Thank you, and I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from Chickamauga.
Mr. President, I raise my hands in gratitude, gratefulness, and praise to all those members who've been up here and talked about ballot security. How important it is for them that the most secure place in our Constitution is the ballot that we vote on, to make sure people trust in that. Thank you. Mr. President, I also raise my hands in disbelief. I can't believe what I'm hearing. Am I dreaming this terrible dream? Is this a bizarre world that everything's backwards? But I also hear that paper ballots is the secure way to go. Are you kidding me? I can't believe what I'm hearing. Like the senator from the 38, she had hanging chads problems years ago. Well, let me tell you my story. You've heard it from here already, but I'm going to tell you again. In 1998, I was a young squire, a lot thinner, had more hair, and I ran for public office. First time I ever did. Against an honorable man, Sonny Huggins. Some of you may remember him. And on election day, I won by 23 votes. 23 votes. I was the fire chief of Chickamauga, just recently retired from there, was assistant chief with Walker County. Nobody knew me, and I won by 23 votes. Well, they were paper and penciled in ballots, written ballots, hand ballots, paper ballots. So Mr. Huggins gets a recount. Well, it was close to Thanksgiving. In that recount, the first box they recounted, remember, paper ballots, handwritten, ink pen, pencil, they found 151 new ballots. 151. They gave me 6. He gets the rest and he wins. Well, those ballots weren't there before the election, and they were paper ballots, I think, not proven, created in some back room somewhere and put in a ballot box, and Mr. Huggins wins. He had nothing to do with it. It was just some mysterious, ghostly figure out there in the hinterlands. So here I am today because of perseverance and being here. As we were knocking on the doors, we continued the elections. People say, aren't you that boy they stole the election from? Trying to rise above board. Well, some people are saying that. Well, we're voting for you this time. So I won by 3,000 votes. Hard to manipulate a 3,000 vote victory. But this is all about paper ballots. That's where this came from. That's where my concern or controversial recount happened. By paper ballots. Not by a machine, by paper ballots. Penciled in ballots. So my belief that penciled in ballots, paper ballots is a way to fraud an election, the way to steal an election. And I, by one, will not stand for that to happen because I agree that the ballot process should be the most secure place in our voting structure in America. Now, when I was here, when I first started, I voted in committee on that. It was a senator from the 13th committee, local government committee, and I voted to move those machines out. Now, we wanted a paper ballot trail, but at the time, the powers that be wasn't going to consider that. Now, I can't remember how I voted on the floor, but I voted to put those the machines out for consideration. I think it's worked pretty well, actually. So I would commend to you that the new system, which there hasn't been a vendor selected, I don't believe. I don't believe that's been put out for an RFI. I hear that. It seems like that has happened, but it hasn't. We're just voting on the process to see if we're going to go to this ballot system. That some vendor will be selected through an RFI process. So, Mr. President, I want everybody to consider this. Ask President Jimmy Carter, when he ran for state senate the first time, how the cemetery precinct all voted in alphabetical order, on paper ballots made his opponent win. You can read his book. So I would recommend to you that we should never consider paper ballots that aren't manufactured by the machine that you read when you're finished and then you scan to make sure your vote is counted accurately. Mr. President, I hope everybody reconsiders their position that is not for this proposed legislation by the senator from the Golden Coast, and I yield the way.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 27th to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a serious topic, but I'll start with a moment of levity. When I was elected and was preparing to come down here, folks told me, you're never going to believe some of the things that you see. You're never going to believe what's going to happen under the Gold Dome. And this morning, ladies and gentlemen, I have seen it all. I've seen the senator from the 48th tell us we should listen to President Trump. I've heard the senator from the 40th laud the opinion of the Libertarian Party. And lastly, I've heard the stalwart conservative senator from the 3rd tell us that we should listen to Democrat Secretary of State Kathy Cox. Ladies and gentlemen, I have seen it all. I do have a confession to make. I have flipped my vote on this issue. When this issue first came to me, it was very binary. It was $150 million versus $30 million. And I'm a fiscal conservative, and so I said, you know what, I'm going to vote against what it seems to be the prevailing winds in my party, and I'm going to vote for paper ballots because that is the fiscally conservative way to vote. And that's what I was sent down here to do. Over the past few weeks, I've been asking for analyses and was never really fully satisfied with what I received, so I did it the old-fashioned way, and I built my own. And what I did was I combined numbers from the ES&S quotation that I got my hands on a couple weeks ago via the AJC, or a week ago via the AJC, with numbers from the Secretary of State, and then ultimately numbers from the OSET study that was referenced earlier today. And in two of those scenarios that I put together, ballot marking devices were actually on a 10-year cost analysis, were actually less expensive. In one instance, they were more expensive, but in all instances, they were within $20 million over the course of 10 years. Now, my numbers may not be exact, but they are exactly relative to how these studies were done. And so when we're within $20 million on a 10-year expenditure, which is $2 million a year, to determine the future of 10.5 million Georgians, my question then is not about money. My question is about what is the better system. And when I look at everything that I do in my life, whether it's when I scan my passport to come into the country, whether it's when I get on an airplane, whether it's when I submit my tax returns, whether it's how I sign contracts, whether it's how I get paid and pay other people, to a point, I use an electronic system because it is more accurate. If you've seen my handwriting, you can verify that anything that I do on a computer is more accurate than anything that I can do handwritten. I also looked at the costs of the localities and what this would do to the good people of Forsyth County. And I mentioned this earlier today, but on the low end, the estimates are $60 million. On the high end, the estimates are $160 million for the unfunded mandate of paper ballots. Paper ballots are the unfunded mandate. I think there's a little bit of confusion in the body today because we hear about machines being an unfunded mandate. Under this proposal, the state pays for the machines. It's in our budget. We pay for the machines. The thermal paper cost, which is peanuts, it's $500,000 a year statewide, that's what gets passed down to the localities. So I believe that this is actually better. And I mentioned earlier, coming from a computer science background, every machine can be hacked. There is not a system that has been proposed today that does not include a hackable machine. So again, we have to take hackability off the table because that is uniform. And if you look at, by the way, the Twitter videos of what it takes to hack these machines, you have to go up to the ballot marking device, pull a cord out of the side of it, pull a card out of it, dismount the monitor, pull the monitor back, reach in, reset it, get a ballpoint pen out, pick the lock that's on the other side of the machine, pull the card out of that machine, and then begin to reprogram that machine, put it all back together unnoticed, and then go to the next machine in the precinct and do it. and then go to the next machine in the precinct and do it, and then go to the next machine in the precinct and do it. If we were on paper ballots and I wanted to tamper with a machine, I would need to tamper with the scanner, one machine. And I can promise you it's a lot easier to get in and get out and tamper with one machine than it is to get in and get out and tamper with 15 or 20 or 25 machines. I want to talk about barcodes. There's been a lot about talk about barcodes and the fact that we can't read barcodes, which is true. This is a paper ballot. Does this have a barcode? You might say no, but the reality is that this is a barcode. It's got an x-axis and a y-axis. And the optical scanners are programmed to read this barcode. And it's going to say, for this particular vote here, I'm on the y-axis, I'm down 20 notches and I'm over 1 notch. So that is a vote for Mr. Hernandez. This is a barcode. Again, we have not had a system presented today that does not talk about the use of barcodes. Voter fraud is a concern. We have not had a documented case of voter fraud in our machines for the last 17 years. We have seen numerous documented cases of voter fraud that have been very consequential to this country. Perhaps the most consequential example of voter fraud was in Minnesota, in a vote that was decided statewide by 312 votes, and that was the vote that put Senator Franken into office, that swung the control of the Senate, and it ultimately led to the deciding vote on Obamacare, which is a decision we are still living with today. 312 vote margin. 1,099 felons voted illegally in that race. We do not know how many non-citizens voted in that race, but we do know that over 1,000 felons voted illegally in that race. Most of your voter fraud happens at the top of the funnel. And if we're really concerned, what we will notice is that this bill addresses the top of the funnel and it also addresses the bottom of the funnel. But the reality is all that you've heard this morning is discussion about the bottom of the funnel. And the reality is the bulk of the fraud does not happen at the bottom of the funnel. I want to finish with a quote and then a word of encouragement. And I'm going to re-enter my twilight zone as a Republican, and I'm going to quote former Secretary of State, Democrat Kathy Cox, who concurs with ACCG, who concurs with 94% of the election officials who responded to the survey, and who concurs with the Fulton County election chair. And she says the overarching mandate for election officials is to ensure that we accurately count our citizens' votes for the candidates of their choice. It is a simple goal made much harder by paper-only voting. So I stand before you as a convert. I was a no on this bill. But after looking at the numbers, after realizing that the alternative would be a significant unfunded mandate, I am now a yes on this bill. Because everything I do in my life tells me that machines are more reliable than my hand when it comes to marking something. And I do not believe that we need to go backwards as technology goes forwards. And lastly, I would like to address the undertone, the undercurrent in the room today, which is that we somehow have been getting our elections all wrong here in Georgia. And make no mistake, we've gotten some things wrong. Each one of us has heard stories personally. We have heard stories this morning about where we didn't get it right. But I want to encourage you and talk about where we have been getting it right. As you know, in 2016, we passed a law. We were the second state in the union to pass a law that linked the voter registration with any DMV change, address changes, initial signups, et cetera. We have become, in many ways, the envy of the country in what we have done, and we have seen people come to our state to see how we do it. What has been the result of that? From 2014 to 2018, we have had 1.25 million more voters registered in the state of Georgia. In 2018, we had 3.9 million people cast a vote. That was more than the presidential election, and that was more than any election in the history of the state of Georgia. Hispanic American voter registration increased by 65%, and Hispanic American voter participation increased by 220%. African American voter registration increased by 15%, and African American voter participation increased by 50%. Caucasian American voter registration increased by 40%. So we don't get everything right. But the fact of the matter is that Georgia is on the right trend line. We are trending towards greater voter participation, greater voter transparency, higher voter registration. And this bill, in my opinion, addresses the top of the funnel to curb voter fraud, and it addresses the bottom of the funnel to make sure that every vote is counted as accurately as possible. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
For what purpose does the senator from the 41st rise?
President, in light of the inaccurate statements of the last speaker and the issues that have arisen in this debate, I move to table House Bill 316 so it can be prepared and improved to be something that could get bipartisan support in this chamber. I move to table.
The senator from the 41st has made a motion that House Bill 316 be tabled. Is there objection? There is objection. All those in favor of the motion to table HB 316 vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. For what purpose does the minority leader rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr.
State your
President.
inquiry.
Isn't it true that the late Sonny Huggins was a sweet mate of mine and had the highest integrity and ethics as any member that I served with the General Assembly? And that I hope that his family does not feel anything the senator said in any way demeaned him.
On the motion to table House Bill 316, the yeas are 21, the nays are 35, and the motion has lost. HB 316 is not placed on the table. At this time, we'll be moving on with debate. I'd like to recognize the senator from the 55th to speak to the minority report.
Thank you, Mr. President, but I am not speaking to the minority report. The senator from the 15th is doing that. But I just wanted to make one statement about Senate Bill 316. It was just 7 days ago when we passed that bill out of the committee. And at the end of the discussion and debate and offering amendments by the minority party that were all rejected, a few of us had a few things to say about the process and about the bill. And my statement was that I had witnessed the committee tailoring a bill to fit the vendor. And I said we should be doing just the opposite of that. And it was tweeted out. And I have followed the tweets because in addition to my statement in committee, I said if a vendor couldn't provide what this state needs to make our elections fair and equitable, then we should move on and find one that can. And because of that, those simple and common sense words, I had 9,926 impressions from that one tweet. And I'm very impressed by that because it says to me that the people of this state are watching what we're doing. And they want us to do the right thing. They want us to have voting machines that are fair and equitable for the people of this state. And I just wanted to make my common sense comment to the members of this body and to let you know that I will not vote for this bill because, first of all, I think we've rushed it. We haven't taken the time to make sure that we're doing the right thing, that we will choose the right vendor that will give us the best product. If you were making a purchase in a store and they have what you want, but it doesn't fit, would you still purchase it? We need a voting machine that fits, not one that has to be made up for us, but one that fits. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 15th to take the balance of the minority report time, which is 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate this opportunity to speak on the bill before us today and outline the Senate Ethics Committee minority report. The undersigned members of the Ethics Committee report to express our disagreement with the committee on House Bill 316. And it expresses problems with the system versus a hand-marked paper ballot. It deals starting with security. Tabulators will either scan the printed names or by scanning a barcode. The barcode is not human readable, and I'm reading that for a purpose. Therefore, the vote that is actually being counted cannot be verified by the voter. We've heard this over and over again today. And then I heard someone speak to errors in Bibb County and Muscogee County, and I want to point out that those, yes, admittedly were human errors, but they were not malicious hacking errors. Cybersecurity experts have studied voting systems and determined that the most secure system is to return to the future, and that is hand-marked paper ballots read by an optical scanner. This puts nothing between the voter and their ballots. The BMDs are hackable, both on an individual level and at the level of the state's central tabulation system. They are not connected to the internet, but they make extensive use of thumb drives, which can be used to infect multiple machines and systems throughout the various counties. The cost. The BMDs are very expensive, and there's been no cost analysis to compare the 10-year, decade-long cost on those BMDs versus a hand-marked paper ballot system. Some cost analysis indicate a cost of something like $150 billion for the BMD machines. Upfront versus 30 to 40 million, we contend upfront costs for hand-marked paper ballots. And therein lies the potential for problems, an unfunded mandate for some of our counties. And let me just go to the whole issue of the thing, and that is what we're talking about is the focus on the voter. I remember the first time that my mother in Montgomery, Alabama, got a chance to vote. After so many years of walking and being a member of the NAACP and trying to do the right thing, she was just a simple maid, but she thought sincerely, and she believed sincerely in the fact that all she had to do was vote, and she would become closer to being a, quote, first-class citizen, end quote. She believed that. And the first time she accomplished this, through tears and years of trying by people in that community, as well as throughout the country, as well as throughout the South, that finally she came home and had tears in her eyes and said, "Son, I have voted, and my vote counted." She truly believed that, and that is the essence of what we're talking about today, what people believe. Now, you can lay out all you want to, put up the technology figures, put out those various technology sayings and words that mean a lot to people who are in the technical arena, but in the final analysis, you know what matters? What the voters believe and what the voter think on both sides of the aisle. It has nothing to do with partisan politics. It has to do with what's in their heart and what they believe, whether they're voting for gun control or whatever the issue is. They believe that their vote is going to be counted. Right now, we have a crisis in confidence of what our machines and balloting will do. We need to be careful about going down this slippery slope. I remember in my business class one time that one of our college professors would tell us over and over again that, listen, money is money because people believe it's money. Money has value because people believe in it, because this is the United States of America. Well, guess what? The same thing is true of our electoral process. If people believe that their vote count, if they believed in the system, then I believe that they know that their vote is going to count. And that's the crux of the matter. Let us make sure we do that. If we would pause for a moment to look past the curtain of partisanship, I believe that we could develop and reestablish confidence in our electoral process. The objective should not be a moral goal under the submission of a political outcome. The moral factor, the human factor, should always prevail. You can come up, as I said, with all the scenarios you want, but in the final analysis is about what I believe. You can talk all you want about the technical gigs and the gigabytes and all the things that make things like that run, but in the final analysis, it's that thing in my head, the spirit of the human being that made America great as it is today. We've got to make sure that we stick to the things that got us where we are today. Belief that America is what it is because everybody can participate. We all can be part of it. But this bill does not get butter from a duck. This dog won't hunt. We got to put it where the goats can get it. And that's where the average voter, Democrat or Republican, can understand it and support it. Senators, let's please put credibility over cost. With that, Mr. President, I yield the well and encourage you to vote your conscience, and hopefully that's a no on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to recognize the senator from the 3rd to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will not take much time because a lot has already been said this morning. But I always think that it's important to learn from our past in order to improve our future. And the election of 2000 gave us an important lesson because it reveals some serious problems with pencil and paper voting. And because of those problems, the Secretary of State, Kathy Cox, decided to work hard to change that system. And many of our colleagues who are here today, who were in the General Assembly at that time, voted to support her and to go to the system that we are currently using. And the improvements that were made were dramatic. We went from being 48th in the nation in overvotes and undervotes to the 3rd in the nation in 2016. That was a dramatic improvement. So we don't need to go backwards to a system that had significant problems. We need to go forward. And that's the opportunity that we have today with this bill to move forward. Yes, there are concerns about the system being hacked or you don't know how you vote. But the fact is, and it's undisputed, that the scanner for a touchscreen ballot, which clearly prints out the persons that you voted for, is scanned the same way as a ballot for a pen and pencil is scanned. The same technical processes are used. But the difference is that you don't have the confusion with that typed printed ballot that you would have in many instances because of just human error, because of mistakes, that you would have with that pen and paper ballot. Some things have been said about cost, but we know that with the system that we're looking at, that the state will pick up the bulk of the cost or the cost for the machines, and that the cost will be much less for our counties. So I just encourage us as a body to move forward. Let's vote for this bill. Let's secure our voting for the people of the state of Georgia, and let's give them a system that's secure and reliable, and that they'll have the confidence to know that their votes truly count. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Thank you, Senator. The question is now on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute? The chair hears none, and the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass by substitute? The question is on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor of the bill will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 35, the nays are 21. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. Chair would like to recognize the majority leader.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate stand adjourned until 10 o'clock on Thursday, 14 March.
Will the Secretary read any announcements?
Rules will meet upon adjournment of 450 of the Capitol. Public safety will meet upon adjournment of the rules meeting in Mez 1. Education and youth has been canceled. Economic development and tourism will meet at 3 p.m. and 125 of the Capitol. Health and human services will meet at 3 p.m. and 450 of the Capitol. Interstate cooperation will meet at 4 p.m. and 125 of the Capitol. Judiciary will meet at 4 p.m. and 307 of the CLOB. And retirement will meet at 4 p.m. in Mez 1. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Any senators wish to make an announcement? The majority leader has moved that the Senate stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Thursday, March 14th, 2019. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the Senate stands adjourned.